computer. Oops, and my computer just said it was going to restart in 55 seconds. No, we don't want that. Okay, we're recording. We're good. Welcome to everybody who's here. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Oh, restart in 55 seconds. No, we don't want. Let me get that Facebook double away. All right, so Salim, the thing is, with you being in charge of the slides, you will need to move them as we go. So sorry that you have to do that for mine too.
Just let me know.
So first, let's just introduce ourselves. Hey, everybody, we haven't done too many of these webinars with multiple hosts, so bear with us. My name is Caitlin Saposi-Belknap. I moved to Amend's National Director. I am here in Sacramento, California today, and really looking forward to talking with you about this topic. And I want to introduce you to Salim Chapman, our new political organizing coordinator, to introduce himself.
Yeah, thank you, Caitlin. Salim Chapman, very excited to have joined Move to Amend a little over a month now. So this is sort of my first big opportunity to dive in. And so I'm really happy to have you guys here this evening and get started.
Awesome. So we're mostly going to talk about Pledge to Amend, but there are some new names that I see here, and there were many new people who registered. So we're going to give a little bit of a introduction and background to our organization and our work so that everybody's on the same page when we talk about the Pledge to Amend campaign. So can you go to the next slide? All right. Oh, and so hopefully everyone's hearing us okay. We can't really do too much troubleshooting while we are doing the presentation, but this whole webinar will be recorded. And so if you're having any difficulties, we will make sure you get the recording tomorrow, and you can catch up with us there. And when you have questions, actually, you can chat in the chat bar at the bottom, but also actually what works a little bit better is there's a Q&A button at the, it's either at the top or at the bottom of your screen. And if you click on that, then you can also type in your questions there. And that makes it a little bit easier to make sure that we don't miss them in the chats. So either option, though, we'll try to check both. And probably most of the questions we'll do at the end. But if you have something that is a clarification on what we're talking about, I'll try to keep an eye on the Q&A and on the chat, and we'll let you, I'll interrupt if it makes sense to do that. Otherwise, we'll take them all at the end. So let's go to the next slide and get started. All right, we're going to give you the overview of Move to Amend, and then we're going to talk about Pledge to Amend and the goals for the campaign, how we plan to accomplish those goals, and then how you can get started, and then we'll have time for questions and answers, and then we'll tell you about some next steps too. So Move to Amend is a coalition of hundreds of organizations and hundreds of thousands of individuals, at this point over 450,000 people, committed to social and economic justice, ending corporate rule, and building a vibrant democracy that's genuinely accountable to the people, not corporate interests. So obviously our mission is a little bit bigger than just amending the Constitution. You can go ahead to the next one. But our goals for the campaign are to pass the We the People Amendment, which is in the House of Representatives as House Joint Resolution 48. And that amendment makes clear that artificial entities like corporations do not have constitutional rights, and that money is not speech. And then our other goal is to provoke discussion and organizing around how to make real the promise of American democracy through constitutional renewal. So we actually don't believe that the We the People Amendment is the only amendment that's necessary to really realize democracy in this country, but we do actually think that it's a strategic first step and kind of the most important thing we could be doing right now in terms of constitutional renewal. You can go ahead to the next one. So our principles and values that we operate from are anti-oppression and solidarity organizing. So what we mean by that is, I think a simple way to think about it is, if we're going to be talking about personhood and who has personhood rights, we have to first recognize that we are in the situation that we are in now because in this country, when it was founded, the decision was made wrongly in terms of who was going to have personhood and who was going to have rights and who was not. And a very small minority were the only ones who had personhood status. And you can look at the history of this country as the story through the lens of the story of all of the rest of us who had to fight to get included in the Constitution through various constitutional amendments led by social movements. And so if we're talking about, and that's really the most fundamental question that a society, needs to ask itself: who's going to have rights and personhood under the law? And that's still open for debate in terms of whether we should actually include all people fully or not. And meanwhile, corporations and those with, money and the most property have been able to kind of usurp the Constitution and have, more rights and protections under the law than the rest of us. And so we have to grapple with that. This isn't just like a policy issue. This is a human rights issue. And we are the continuation of the struggle to recognize the full personhood and humanity of all people and not property. And so that is kind of where our starting point is from. And then solidarity organizing is working with those who are on the front lines of dealing with the consequences of a system that doesn't recognize the humanity of everyone fully, and working with them to build this movement. Coalition and movement building. So the only way that we are going to be able to amend the Constitution is by building a movement. The Constitution doesn't get amended by Congress, taking the lead. It happens when Congress is forced to react to a movement that has been built, in the streets, in communities, in people, in families, in social networks. And so that's what we need to build in order to have the power to win. And that's done through grassroots organizing. So Move to Amend is structured with local chapters because we actually believe that that's how you most effectively build power, is in communities where people actually live and work together and have relationships in real life, not just online. We have a dedication to political education because when we look at past movements that have been successful, they have all been committed to political education and deepening that education ever more with each thing we learn. It's kind of like an onion, and we have to peel back the layers to understand the situation that we're in to come up with solutions that will actually solve our problems. And so political education is how we do that. And then it's critical to have our political and economic independence. So those are our kind of 5 principles and values that we operate from. You can learn more about them in our on our website. If you look at our strategic plan, we kind of spell out each one of these. If you go to movetoamend.org/plan, you can see that. You can go ahead to the next slide, Celine. And so amending the Constitution, we're not, we could do a whole webinar on this, but just to remind everybody, so there are 2 ways in the Constitution to amend it. The first is through Congress. So 2/3 of both houses of Congress must pass an amendment resolution, and then 3/4 of state legislatures have to ratify it. So that's 38 states. The other mechanism to amend the Constitution, according to the Constitution, is a constitutional convention. And that would require 2/3 of state legislatures to call for a convention to propose an amendment. And then 3/4 of the states have to ratify still. And so right now, Move to Amend is primarily focused on the first option. As I said, our amendment is House Joint Resolution 48 in the House. We're still working to get it introduced in the Senate. And we don't put resources into a constitutional convention per se, but we also believe that we can't just take that off the table because that is the most democratic way to amend the Constitution that we have available to us. And if Congress refuses to act, when Congress is bought and paid for by corporations, we might very well find that Congress refuses to act. So having that convention option needs to be on the table. And yet we also need to make sure that that process would be one that would be, empowering and move us forward in terms of human rights and not backwards. And there's, a lot up in the air about what that would look like because we have never had a constitutional convention since the Constitution was drafted. So just a quick, civics refresher there. We can go ahead to the next slide. So Move to Amend's strategy is to focus primarily on the American public, not Congress. We are going to talk about, candidates, and that kind of links to the bigger strategy with the amendment in Congress. But the reality is the most important thing is to build a movement for power. And that isn't done with only lobbying, right? That is done through education, coalition building. So reaching out to other organizations, working on issues that are affected by corporate power to show the linkages, to show that this is the legal and sort of systemic solution to so many of the problems that people are fighting against, and not that they should stop working to protect their communities or to protect their families or their jobs, but rather that we should do that and understand the longer term solution that we ultimately are going to need so that we don't have to keep on fighting these fires. And we do that through building a broad and diverse multiracial and intergenerational movement. We have to be intentional about doing that. I mean, one, first and foremost, is that if you look at past social movements, the ones that have been most successful have been multiracial and intergenerational. This country is deeply divided around race. We also actually are pretty divided around, there's generation gaps and cultural differences that cause a lot of, that take away from our ability to build power, I guess is how I would say it. And so, and so does our segregation and the racism that we're still struggling with in this country because of the founding that was rooted in slavery and genocide of Native people. And so we have to figure out how to get the skills to overcome that in our movements so that we can be as broad and deep and large and powerful as possible. And that doesn't just happen by saying it on paper. It comes with by doing work intentionally, reaching out to those most affected by corporate rule, trusting those on the front lines to know best kind of what the solutions and situation is, and building bridges. And so we do a lot of work with our local grassroots folks to build those skills, and that's an ever evolving, process that we're working on and committed to. We really believe in community organizing, not just activism. So again, it all has to do with power, right? We need to build the power to make it possible to amend the Constitution. So power organizing gets you power. Organizing is relationships, organizing is solidarity, organizing is commitment to each other. Activism, you could say, is those things, but we're defining activism as sort of more when individuals, show up for the Women's March or click on a petition because you support something. And those are good first steps, but that doesn't actually really build lasting power, right? You have to organize to do that. And so we need to find ways to organize our communities around this issue, and not just be acting as individuals. And focusing on grassroots organizing to pass local and state resolutions calling for the amendment. This is one of the tactics that we use, and we kind of try to put it front and center because, again, it's one of the tactics that builds the most power. Pledge to Amend is another one in terms of building relationships with people who are elected to office to make sure that they serve us and not other interests. And so we'll be talking about that again in a minute. We can go to the next slide. And so just for folks who haven't been working with us, a little bit of background on our structure. We are a grassroots organization. So we have what we call Move to Amend affiliates. Those are like our chapters all over the country. And we also have We the People Amendment working groups, which is for folks who are maybe a little bit more loose, not quite ready to be an affiliate. So maybe it's just a couple people, a handful of people who are ready to start doing the work towards building an affiliate, but not yet. And so those are kind of the two categories of groups that you could create in your community, or look to see if there is already one of those in your community. And then at the national level, we have our national team. So we have a national board, and then we have 13 staff. Not everybody's full-time, which is very small considering what we're trying to do. And we're actually really pleased that we've been able to grow a bit in the last year. Very grateful and thankful that we've been able to add people like Salim to the team. And then we have national committees. So the committees are made up of our board and staff, and then volunteers. And so sometimes those volunteers come from our affiliates, but sometimes they're just individuals with particular expertise. So we have a media and communications committee. So if folks have experience doing media work and journalism or social media work, might fit there. We have a law and research committee. So if people have a legal background or a constitutional background, might go there. We have a political organizing committee. So folks have been involved with campaigns or targeting candidates or running for office themselves. That's sort of where that fits there. I won't go through all of them. Our committees are open, and all of them do have openings now. So if you go to our website and click in the area kind of on the left side about Move to Amend. You can see the list of our committees, and there's an application process if you'd like to get involved there. And then we also have 4 issue or sector caucuses, which is another way to get involved if there's kind of a particular area of expertise. So we have a labor caucus for working with folks in the labor movement. We have interfaith caucus for working with folks who are of faith across all different faiths and religions. We have an educators caucus for educators, at the elementary up to college level. And then we also have an arts and culture caucus for working with artists and cultural workers. And the idea is that in each of those sectors, we're trying to move the amendment work forward. So getting labor unions to endorse, getting teachers to bring this into their curriculum, et cetera. So if you fit any of those 4, you're also very welcome to check out our caucuses. So those are kind of all the different ways in terms of our structure that you could plug in. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. And I will turn it over to you. And I'm so sorry that you're sick. We will all be very cough whenever you need to.
Thank you so much. And as Caitlin said, please bear with me, everyone, tonight. I'm sort of getting over a cold, so I have a little bit of a cough. So I apologize in advance. So let's talk about Pledge to Amend. The purposes of Pledge to Amend is to educate a candidate about this issue, to identify whether or not he or she is a supporter of this particular issue. What's their position? Are they an opponent? Are they undecided? And also hopefully to move them a little bit, right? I think a really nice thing about this campaign is that it really provides opportunity to provide that education and hopefully cultivate champions on this issue, or at the very least to soften or neutralize an opponent. Fate would have only had it that I wore the shirt today that says "For," and I really think, as Caitlin said, that Pledge to Amend is a really good way to advance our strategy. And so we're going to get a little bit into how you would go about doing that. But first, let's talk a little bit about goals. So the goals of Pledge to Amend is to target candidates for local, state, and federal office to get their support on the record for the We the People Amendment and to make this an election issue. So this is a really great time, again, to not only educate candidates about this, but also the general public and really to organize folks around this issue. We are particularly looking to get 300 Pledge to Amend signups, with at least 50% of those individuals winning on election day. But first, let's talk a little bit about some do's and don'ts. So you guys might be aware that Move to Amend is a 501c3 organization. So with that, there are some limitations to political involvement. What that means is that Move to Amend is nonpartisan and can only provide voter education. So with that, if you were to conduct a candidate forum, you have to invite all candidates to that particular forum. If you were to, you're able to ask questions to any particular candidate. You can encourage voter registration. You can send educational information to candidates. But again, this has to be all the candidates who are running in a particular race. You can support or oppose a ballot initiative, as well as prepare voter scorecards to show how a particular legislator voted. But with that, you cannot show any favoritism to one particular legislator or candidate as a result of how they voted on a particular issue. You also can't do anything coordinated with a particular political party. So this includes voter registration, get out the vote efforts, or any other similar effort. You cannot provide support to a particular candidate on Move to Amend's behalf, or coordinate any activities with a candidate or political party, as I stated before. So how are we going to get to 300? There are a couple different ways that we hope we will be able to do that. One is a voter pledge. Another is a candidate questionnaire / pledge. Candidate meet and greets, also a really good way to engage candidates as well as the general public. A candidate forum is another tactic. Bird dogging candidates, which is another very good strategy to use, and media. So let's talk about the voters pledge. So the Move to Amend voters pledge essentially states that a particular voter will, for local, state, and federal candidates, will support Move to Amend United States Constitution to firmly establish that money is not speech and that human beings not corporations, are persons entitled to constitutional rights. The purpose of the voter pledge is a really great opportunity, again, to educate the public and bring them into this campaign in a way that typically people's attention are a little bit more heightened during election season. So this is a really good opportunity to engage them on this. It's also a really great opportunity to apply pressure to candidates and elected officials. If you can get a significant show of grassroots support through the voter pledge, you are certainly more likely to sway the opinion of a particular candidate for office. It also elevates this issue, right? We really hope that this is a key component of the public discourse around the election season in any race, whether it's local, state, or federal. And so this is a really good way, again, to bring people into that tent, really show the groundswell of support for the issue, and really raise it as a major talking point during the campaign. So what are your keys to success to executing a successful voter pledge campaign? You want to send the pledge to everyone you know. This includes carrying paper sign-ups wherever you are with you, emailing them to your distribution list, and even potentially putting a post on social media. Tabling at community events is also a really good way to reach out to people. Not listed on here is also canvassing your neighborhood. It's a good opportunity to sort of get out, meet your neighbors, as well as provide an opportunity to educate them about a particular issue. So in order to support you in this effort, Move to Amend will provide the pledge petition, which is online. It's also available for download. We'll supply you with some talking points. That's a good way to sort of advance the dialogue on this issue, and any troubleshooting and support you need in terms of getting started. So let's talk a little bit about the candidate questionnaire/pledge. So it covers 4 different areas. It's asking a candidate that to support amending the US Constitution to make clear, again, that corporations and other official entities do not have constitutional rights, and that money is not speech, and campaign spending should be limited through regulation. It asks them to use their office to support the movement to amend the Constitution by passing resolutions, proposing legislation, and publicly speaking out about the need for this amendment. It asks them how they will use their public office to end corporate constitutional rights and big money in politics, as well as their position on the 2010 Supreme Court decision around Citizens United. So similar to the Voters Pledge, this is a really great educational tool to reach out to incumbents and challengers, and really an opportunity to raise this issue in a way that they previously may have not been aware of. And also it's a really good accountability tool. Whatever position a candidate takes, ideally supportive on this issue during the campaign season, it's a really good tool to go back to them once they're in office and to hold them accountable for the decisions or the position that they made during the campaign. So your keys to success here is to really be targeted in terms of the races that you want to be active in. Given that we're focusing on local, state, and federal, there's going to be a number of potential races that you can get into, and you want to be particularly targeted in your approach, because given the high number of potential races out there, you can sort of dilute your efforts a little bit. So it's good to be strategic about which races you really want to target. Waiting until the following petition has ended and that you know what particular candidates are going to be on the ballot, we will be putting up a tool soon that will actually list the dates, and there's also some good resources out there that we'll provide that will tell you the date for your particular state when your filings are due. But it's really good to be very timely with this. Once you know who's going to be on the ballot, within the next 2 to 3 weeks, I would say it's a really good time to get those letters and invitations out there to really encourage candidates for office to participate in this campaign. And again, it's really important, as I said before, given the legal status of Move to Amend, that you send this to all candidates in a particular race and give them an adequate amount of time, generally 3 to 4 weeks, to respond to your efforts. Should they not respond, it's really good to make follow-up calls to ensure that they received your materials and that it's on their radars. If a candidate does respond online, we will send you the responses. And if the candidate sends back the paper survey, we will enter the results for you online. You should decide how many you will publish and promote the results, print copies, and send press releases, which we can all help you with. So, Move to Amend will provide pledges / questionnaire questions, sample letters to do your initial outreach to candidates, a script to make follow-up phone calls, a template to hand out to voters, a sample press release, and again, any troubleshooting and support you need. So this is a really strategy that I think could be particularly helpful. It's a little bit more of a lift than the other two that I talked about, but I really think it's a good opportunity to both educate the general public as well as to engage with candidates. And those are candidate meet and greets. So hosting a candidate meet and greet provides opportunity to develop relationships with individuals who will likely be in positions to make future public policy decisions. And so, as I was just saying, it's a really good opportunity to educate the general public. A lot of folks will have interest just for the opportunity to come out and interact with candidates for office, even if they aren't necessarily well-versed on Move to Amend issues, as well as a really good opportunity to educate the candidates on this issue when you have them there, because they want to be in a setting to engage voters. It's a really great opportunity to develop relationship building. Anytime in advocacy and community organizing, it's really good to have strong relationships with candidates and elected officials. And again, really great accountability tool. If the candidate gets elected, anything, any position that they state during this particular event, you can then use to hold them accountable for that position once they get into elected office. So here, your keys to success are send invitations and follow up with phone calls. Follow up is really critical. As you can imagine, there are a lot of different organizations and issues who are reaching out to candidates for their time. And so it is really important to have a very good follow-up strategy once you conduct your initial outreach. Similarly, again, it's really critical that you invite all candidates to participate. I do want to put out there that it isn't a requirement that every candidate shows up to your event. They can certainly decline to participate, but it is extremely critical that you make the effort to invite them and provide the opportunity for them to participate. You want to determine the duration. Usually it's really good to keep these events about to an hour. You want to keep it to a meet and greet format, so you don't sort of want it to shift to a debate or sort of a community meeting where people are voicing concerns. So you really want to make sure that you narrow in on the topic and you stick to the format that will that is a little less contentious than some of those other meetings that I referred to. You want to ask each candidate to speak for about 10 to 15 minutes about their views on this issue. And then be sure to allow time for people to ask questions and to have a dialogue around it. You may want to designate specific participants to discuss certain issues to ensure that all top priorities are really discussed. Sometimes in these forums, interacting with elected officials, people can be a little bit shy at first. So it's really good to designate a few folks in the early stages of the meeting to be a little bit more vocal so that people feel comfortable contributing later. Once the event is over, I think it's really good to send a nice thank you note to the candidates for participating. This is really critical, again, for that relationship building and really showing that you have a certain level of gratitude for their time and participating. And then you also want to send a follow-up email to attendees to thank them for coming and to provide additional opportunities for them to get involved. A great recruitment tool, as I said before, for people to get more knowledgeable about your issue. Hopefully that will have sparked some interest during the meet and greet, and then they will be more likely to sort of get involved in additional activities you have moving forward. Great forum to sort of recap the event is social media. Again, expanding the reach of folks who may have not seen the event, so that way they can sort of tune in later and perhaps get feel more likely to engage with your efforts at a later point in time. So here, Move to Amend will provide talking points, sample invitations to candidates, and as always, the notorious troubleshooting and support.
And maybe just real quick, we didn't
Sure.
say this, but if you need help thinking about like kind of the agenda and process and all that, that could kind of fit under troubleshooting and support. We can kind of walk you through that. We haven't ever done these before as Move to Amend, so our affiliates might not be familiar with it. So we can give a sample agenda and stuff like that if y'all would like.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Kate. So sort of going up the ladder of engagement, the next bigger lift is a candidate forum. This is a little bit more of sort of your debate component. So this is a public event where you invite the candidates to express their positions on this issue. And again, another great opportunity to engage folks in your community around this. Candidate forums typically are larger in size than a candidate meet and greet. Candidate meet and greet is typically, you want to keep it between the 15 and 20 people range so that everyone feels like it's intimate enough that they can participate and have a really good dialogue, but also there's enough people there for the candidate that it makes it seem like a worthwhile opportunity. But a candidate forum, I think, you're in the realm of 50 to 100 people, possibly if you can get the appropriate venue. But the purposes are very similar and the goals are very similar, is that, this is a really good opportunity to educate the candidates, opportunity to bring more people into the tent in the general public. And then it's also a really good way to elevate the dialogue on this issue. Hopefully there'll be some media coverage on your candidate forum. Candidate forums typically will draw some media coverage. And so it's a nice way to sort of elevate this issue into the public discourse, both within the forum and then hopefully outside of it as well. And another critical point of this, which really is what Pledge to Amend is really based around, is that it's a really good accountability tool, so that if the candidate does get elected to office, you can use these positions to hold them accountable for that. So your keys to success here: pick a time and a date to host your forum. It's really good to look for locations and times that is really good for everyone and can provide a broad range of accessibility for folks. So good places to think of is a local school, community center, or library. Similarly with the candidate meet and greets, send invitations and then follow up. And then, as I said multiple times already, you just have to make sure that you send an invitation to all candidates to participate. Here it's really good to find a moderator who can sort of introduce the candidates and keep the dialogue going. So that could be someone in your group, or it might be some other community leader or volunteer leader that you guys know, to sort of keep the dialogue flowing and ensure that no particular candidate is sort of overwhelming the debate. A really good strategy here is to consider co-hosting. Candidate forums become a lot more attractive when a candidate thinks that there's a larger coalition of folks who are sort of behind a particular effort. So if you can find a like-minded organization to co-host this with, that's always a boost. And then it's really nice to share tasks and responsibilities, because as I sort of started saying, this is can be a pretty heavy lift for folks. So it's always nice to be able to delegate and to share tasks. Here you want to have a pretty good media strategy around how to get the word out. So sending out a media advisory to local news outlets 5 days in advance is typically the guiding rule with these things. And then after the event, similarly with the candidate meet and greet, you want to send a thank you email to folks and provide additional opportunities to participate, along with a thank you note to the candidates. Hand thank you notes are really good here. I know in the digital age, we sort of have lost that a little bit, but I think adding a little bit of the personal touch can go a long way to that relationship building. So it's worth taking the extra 5 minutes to handwrite a note when you're sending a follow-up to the candidates. So bird dogging candidates is another strategy that I anticipate could be very actively used this election season. And so bird dogging involves seeking out candidates, pinning them down with specific questions, and then retrieving their views. So this means that, you'll identify a particular campaign event that a candidate is going to be at and ensure that you get there and put yourself in a position to ask a question of them relevant to this particular issue and to get their response on the record. Similarly to a lot of the other issues that a lot of other strategies and tactics that we've discussed already, bird dogging is a really good way to elevate this issue through the media, because typically at candidate events, media will sort of already be in attendance as a result of outreach that the candidate and campaigns had done. And so bird dogging is a really good way to really get attention on this issue into the media. Similarly, it's an opportunity to engage with the candidates and to educate them, as well as to hold them accountable once they are in office.
If I may, tell a quick story about an example of how valuable bird dogging can be. So when Mitt Romney was running for president, some folks may remember that it was at the Iowa State Fair, and he was speaking, and there were some folks in the audience who kind of started heckling him about corporations being people. And Mitt Romney, those folks were Move to Amend supporters, actually. And Mitt Romney then said his famous, "Corporations are people, my friend." And that soundbite stuck with him through the whole election, and became, a way that, Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert joked about it. And so it elevated corporate personhood, and it also, made Romney look bad for anybody who doesn't agree that corporations are people. And so, that was sort of like bird dogging done like perfecto. But similarly, you kind of want to be aggressive, and you want to be there, and that can actually really shape a race if you can get there in the right moment and get a good soundbite, whether it's, saying something really good and supportive, or perhaps, something really bad that everyone should be aware that that's where the candidate stands. So I don't know that we'll ever get another one quite so perfect, but we could try.
No, I think you made a really critical point that I just want to emphasize, that I think typically when people think of bird dogging, they think of it in the context of, you're going to a candidate who may not be a supporter of your particular issue and sort of trying to get their position on the record, but it can be a really good opportunity to pull out a position of support from a candidate who you do think would be very supportive to the issue. And I think that they would appreciate the opportunity to speak on that. And so I do think it's important to sort of think of it as a tool on both sides. So thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah, and on your last point, if they've publicly kind of put something forward out there that you've then been able to promote, then there's sort of that much more on the hook, even if they're supportive, to make it more of a critical issue. So like, for example, Beto O'Rourke, who's running for Senate right now, is a co-sponsor in Texas against Ted Cruz. He is a co-sponsor of the We the People Amendment, but he's not necessarily out there right now talking about the We the People Amendment. But potentially, if Move to Amend supporters in Texas kind of rallied to that campaign and tried to kind of get him to publicly talk more about his support, then he might be a very solid option for us when we're trying to get it introduced in the Senate, should he get elected, for example, or next year, even if he's still in the House, to be more of a champion rather than a more kind of quiet supporter, which is where he's at right now.
Great example. All right. So keys to success. You want to find out where the candidate and elected official are planning to make appearances. So I find that social media is a really good way to do this, but also getting on their email list and checking their website. You could potentially call campaign staff or sort of keep abreast of the local media. I find that bird dogging is always best in a team, so I think it's really good to get a group together and have a group of advocates who are willing to attend an event rather than just yourself, because it will sort of minimize that intimidation you might feel and increase the odds of you getting a question asked to a candidate the more people you have in the audience. I really think it's important to have a plan and a strategy in advance. because when that moment comes, there could be sort of a little bit of intimidation. So you want to make sure that you write down your question that you intend to ask, so it's very targeted, and you ensure that you hit the points that you want to. And then you want to make sure you really get a good seat. So it might entail you arriving a little bit early so that you can sit as close to the front where the policymaker is going to be. But with your team, make sure that everyone spreads out. So again, no increasing odds that you'll be able to get a question asked or potentially multiple questions asked, which is sort of the ideal. So you have to act quick. So you want to get your hands up fast and first and put it up very high. So those are all good strategies. You want to make sure that you do it even before a sort of Q&A has even been open. So that way you make sure you get yourself in the queue. But then if you don't get your question asked during Q&A, handshake lines and photo opportunities are a really good chance to talk to the politician and ask them a question and get their response on the record. So once you've done that and you got their position on the record, it's important to get quoted. As I started off saying, press are most than likely going to be at these events already because of outreach that the campaigns has done. So you want to make sure you have a statement ready as a follow-up because, sometimes they will approach you if you make a statement and ask the candidate a particularly targeted question. And so you want to make sure you have, your statement that you want in the media ready to go should the opportunity present itself. And then you want to make sure you publicize your efforts. So if it does get in the press, make sure that you share a story. If you're able to get some sort of video or of you asking a question of the candidate, make sure that you share it on social media. These are all really good strategies to getting the word out there should the candidate, i.e. Mitt Romney, make a statement or response that isn't necessarily very well received by many.
Greg's got a tip right now that I think is worth just interjecting with. He says a good trick to be recognized is to hold up a small American flag in your hand. And they probably, you wave that and then you'll get called on. Good tip, Greg.
Yeah. You get those flags ready in addition and high and first. All right, so we will provide you with some sample questions that you can sort of take and tailor yourself. Best practices and tips, i.e. holding a flag in order to get yourself noticed during Q&A, uploading your videos to our website and social media, as well as troubleshooting and support. So quickly on the media, as I've probably said multiple times already, election time is when people sort of really focusing on big money in elections, and it's a really opportune time to get media coverage because the media are looking for stories around these issues. So you want to use that to your advantage. One way of doing this is to research spending in local and state elections in your particular area and to publish those results so that there's transparency there. And if there's any sort of significant discrepancies, you can call that out. It's also a really good chance to get op-eds and letters to the editors published that speaks to this issue. During election season, candidates are really actively reviewing media coverage and opinion pages of news outlets. And so this is a really good time to that education and elevating the issue in the public discourse. The media is a really good way to do that, specifically op-eds and letters to the editors. And then, we talked a little bit earlier about being strategic with campaign filing announcements. And when sort of everyone officially gets on a ballot, it's a really good time to send a press release from your particular organization, which is really talking about the issue of big money in politics and why we need sort of a systematic solution because the media will sort of be looking for stories in that realm. So we will provide talking points, sample letters to the editor, sample press releases, as well as more troubleshooting and support. So quickly, how to get started. You can visit our website at movetoamend.org/pledge amend 2018. to familiarize yourself with the materials there. And then it's a really good opportunity to get your group together and to make a plan. If you already have an affiliate together, to set up a meeting. And if you don't have a group, it's a really good time to start a group, which you can also find more information on our website. And let us know your plans. You have my email there. Please reach out to me with any questions, what you're doing, if you need any help thinking through anything that you're doing. I'm here to help and really enjoy this stuff. So please feel free to send me any questions that you might have. So with that, we will open it up for questions. I'm sure we have many, because that was a ton of information in like 20 minutes. So I'm ready to have them rapid fire. Caitlin, whenever you are.
Yeah, great job. There actually are not a whole ton. I answered a couple to folks directly.
Awesome.
So please let us know your questions. Go ahead and put them in the Q&A or in the chat. So Barbara asks, will Move to Amend be sending questionnaires to all federal candidates? So I think she's talking about, will National be sending questionnaires to all federal candidates?
Yes. So that is an important question. And thank you, Barbara, for asking that. So Move to Amend will handle all outreach. Move to Amend national staff will handle all outreach to federal candidates. So that includes anybody who's running for Congress and Senate. But we're asking sort of affiliates and supporters of Move to Amend to handle state and local races in their particular area.
Yeah, and just to add in, if your affiliate would rather be the one to do especially the follow-up part, it might make sense for us to just send the initial letters kind of all together. But if you want to do even those, we are open to, to that. If you already have, kind of a plan and relationships or whatever, we're just trying to offer to do that part to be helpful. And then also, I just wanted to take a quick minute I hope it's clear to everyone why it would be important to not just, yes, it is a general election year, so national races are, everyone's paying attention to that, and state races kind of too, but not forgetting about local races, even all the way down, to school board, because this is a longer term campaign, right? We're not going to get the amendment through this Congress. We're not going to get the amendment, this year or probably next year, right? So building the relationships with people who are local leaders, those local leaders are going to go on to be the most likely people who are going to run for state office. And those state office holders are going to be the ones who are most likely to run for Congress. So at the point that we have the power and the capacity to actually get the amendment passed, those people who will be doing that, they're not actually in Congress yet, probably most of them. And so building those relationships and that understanding now is really important. So don't look at it as those are like lesser and less important. Plus, if you want to serve the public, this issue is locally relevant. There are more and more communities where there are races where big corporations or one wealthy individual are really determining who will be the district attorney or the sheriff. And that really matters. And so it's not just something that's federally relevant. So don't forget about those local races. And now we've got a bunch more questions. So unless, Salim, you've got anything else to add on that, okay. So Geneva asks, how do we find out what candidates have pledged to amend?
So you can go to, and please, Caitlin, jump in here on the processes. You can go to our website, and I'm not sure the direct URL. Actually, Caitlin, I'm going to pass that to you if you don't mind.
Yeah, I'm just looking to really quickly. So if you go to the Pledge to Amend page, there are two big buttons that say join the campaign. And one says sign the candidate pledge, sign the voter pledge. So those are for candidates. But then right above that, it says where do they stand? And then it says, click here to find out if your candidates have taken the pledge, and then click here to find out if your elected officials have taken the pledge. So that first one, find out if your candidates have taken the pledge, is where you can see the list of candidates. Sometimes it takes us a couple days to get folks entered. Sometimes we get a big bunch of them, but we're going to kind of be on top of that every week from now until Election Day. So that's where you can go to find out if candidates have taken the pledge. And then we will also be promoting that to our own list, and you can promote your local answers as well. And so the direct URL to that is kind of long, but I will post it in the chat. so folks can get to that directly. But going to the Pledge to Amend page is sort of probably the easiest way to get there. And actually, the quick shortcut is if you go to movetoamend.org/pledge. Oh, nope, just kidding. That actually takes you to the pledge. So that's what you can tell candidates, though. You don't have to tell them the longer URL. You can just say movetoamend.org pledge, go there and take it. And then kind of from the main Pledge to Amend page is where you can see a list by state of all the candidates who have taken the pledge. And then after the election, we always update that page that says, your elected officials. So everybody who wins the race then stays on our site as an elected official who has taken the pledge. So hopefully that's clear. Let's see. And also for those of you, there's not many folks on live right this minute, but there are a few. So I can see the thread there. So if you have questions, you can also chat them or type them in the comments, and we'll see those as well. So let's see. Petra asks, I'm really new to this, so this will sound elementary. Where can I get info as to how a corporation is considered a person, and how can a person be considered a corporation? Do you want me to take that?
Please.
Just in terms of knowing where our site is and everything. So good. That's fine to ask a fundamental question like that, and appreciate you asking for more info. So our website, if you go to the website and then on the top under Learn More, and there's an option for recommended reading. And then there are a series of, about half a dozen, maybe a little bit more than that, of kind of the key articles that talk about what it means for corporations to have constitutional rights, or what corporate personhood is. And so that's where I would recommend going. I can post a link directly to that recommended reading section too, but so then you could click it and kind of open up that page and have that available for after this webinar. But again, that's under the Learn More section of our website. And our website has a ton of information, which is both great, but sometimes can be a little overwhelming. So that's kind of how to zero in on kind of some of the most key resources to give that foundational understanding. You could also, under that same Learn More section, look at the frequently asked questions, and that also gives kind of pretty quick answers for kind of why it is that we need to end corporate constitutional rights and what the problem with that is. So I hope that answers your question, Petra, and I'm sorry if I'm saying your name wrong. Let's see. John asks, I'm running for state representative in Oregon. My committee discourages emphasizing this issue as there are many, but it excites people. Is there a place for this issue among the many for a new candidate? Do you want to take that?
Sure. And I just want to say you guys are seeing the benefit of having co-hosts in real time. Because when I don't know something, I can throw it over to Caitlin.
We've only been with us for a couple of months, so you're doing awesome.
No. So I think as a new candidate, I think it's really important to use your status, for lack of a better term, or credibility that you're going to get as being a candidate in this race, to really educate folks. And to really help them understand this, because I think as a candidate, you have a unique perspective on this issue than most people would, because in running a campaign, you're facing, the constraints of having to fund a campaign on a daily basis. So I think that it really gives you an advantage to try to educate your committee on the importance of this issue and why it's really relevant to having good folks in office like yourself. And I really think that the candidate pledge is a really good way to embrace that dialogue, or at least to start that dialogue, even if you cannot, even if you aren't in a place where you feel comfortable to sort of affirm the pledge. I think it's important to make a response to the questionnaire, because at the very least you can sort of approach a dialogue with your committee in terms of why this is an important issue and why you guys should have a position on this one way or another. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I didn't totally catch all of your answers, Salim, because I was kind of scanning the questions, but I would also, I think you didn't exactly say this, add that this issue connects to every issue. So I hear you that your campaign committee is saying, watch out for, just kind of talking about everything, but not just money in politics, but the combination of money in politics and corporate power affects almost every other issue. And so it's sort of foundational. So I would put the pitch in that you could talk about this and kind of cover a lot of bases, and voters appreciate, the public appreciates a systemic and kind of deep solution being offered, as opposed to kind of just really policy wonky, nitty gritty, and also stuff that kind of isn't going to make that much of a difference, which is a lot of what's on the table, right? So just sort of marginal, tiny little incremental changes. So saying we need something systemic and big and real that's going to just solve the problem is actually the kind of thing that motivates voters. So I would put, as somebody who has run and been elected to office, I would say that actually appeals to voters and is what they want. So I think you should go back to your campaign committee and kind of negotiate that a little bit more. Let's see, a couple more questions. Rachel asks, if there's no group started in my area, what should I focus on first as a solo volunteer besides getting a group started? Outreach opportunities like farmers markets? Do you want to answer that, or do you want me to?
Yeah, I'll just start off from sort of the pledge to amend perspective, and then I'll sort of let you focus on sort of the logistical points. So I think, as I said multiple times, and I feel like I'm repeating myself, but I think that this is a really, really great tool to reach out to folks. So whether it is at a community meeting or community event, or whether it's sort of just, knocking doors in your neighborhood and doing outreach, I think, election season, people are sort of more civically engaged and active and aware. And so I really think this is a really good opportunity to sort of engage folks, to bring them into potentially starting a more formalized groups with you. But then I'll let Caitlin talk a little bit more about, the structure and processes that Move to Amend have in terms of supporting folks to get things started.
Yeah, I guess I would just add, again, if you wanted to kind of, it is an election year, and like Salim has said, this is when kind of people most pay attention to politics. So it's a good time to pull people in. There's also a lot going on, so sometimes that can be, competing stuff. But I would say, I'm not totally sure, Rachel, if how much you have already kind of connected with our folks. And so you might already have done some of this stuff. But for others who kind of have a similar question, we can first try to help find out if there is anybody else in your area who's indicated that they would be interested in starting a group. Lots of times there will be a couple of people who at different times have said they're interested, but they don't want to do it by themselves, so they haven't really got it started. But if we kind of connect a group of you, then that means that you've got more of that critical mass. And then picking something concrete like Pledge to Amend to do together to kind of get started. You don't necessarily have to get going on all the affiliation requirements. You can kind of just get started on a project, which can coalesce your group. And then you can look at affiliation, down the line, maybe even all the way after the election, or when you've kind of grown some more people too. But, going to farmers markets and petitioning is a great idea. Using our petition, our it's not a formal political petition, but just an organizing tool to get people on the list, tell them that you want to get a group started in your area, ask if people are interested in plugging in, going to other political events, and you kind of petitioning outside, or asking if you could have a table even, to kind of start to get the buzz going and find if there are people that are coming to you and gravitating once you kind of start to put it out there that you're available to be the point person, at least for now, can all kind of help. We don't recommend that anybody affiliate until they've got at least 5 people. So that's kind of what you want to do first, is build that core. And it might be your friends, that might be family members or coworkers. But if you don't have that, we would look to our database and see if we can kind of help find some folks for you, and then go and, recruit new people. But having a project that you're doing, rather than come to meetings and, let's talk for a long time about what our hypothetical structure might be, that might not be the best way to first pull people in. So, saying we can do other stuff later. I'm not, you not deciding everything that the group will do, but saying, hey, we're going to take on Pledge to Amend right now, and we're going to target, everybody who's running for state office, or, all of our, our Congress members, or, however you want to do it, picking a reasonable target that you can handle, and then trying to recruit people to work on that particular project. People like to come in and do work because we're all really busy. So making it as concrete as possible is helpful. And at the end, we have a questionnaire that you can fill out to give us feedback on this. But one of the things you can indicate is if you'd like a follow-up phone call from one of our volunteer coordinators. So for all of you who are not yet plugged in, feel free to say yes. And then Millie or Keon, our volunteer coordinators, would be happy to give you a call and kind of talk through all of this more as it relates to your particular situation, your particular community. And we can kind of let you know, who might be in our database that might have already said that they have an interest in plugging in that we would connect you to. Let's see, there are a few more here. So Donald asks, what action is being taken in the Senate on a similar amendment? And also, what is the status of Bernie Sanders on this issue? Why has he not supported the We the People amendment?
So as far as, I'm not aware of similar efforts, so please feel free to jump in, Caitlin, but we are actively working on trying to get a companion bill introduced into the Senate for HJR 48, which is the We the People amendment. So we're really excited about Pledge to Amend because we really think that this is a really good opportunity to engage candidates who are running for Senate offices, to educate them about this issue and to really cultivate them as champions so that when the next Congress start, they are ready to really embrace this issue and to potentially introduce it. In terms of the Bernie Sanders campaign, I think that there has been some engagement with his office, but I think that there's a lot of different, I don't know if he totally sees eye to eye with everything that we're asking for. And so I think that there just needs to be a little bit more, outreach and cultivation, because I think simply because someone is a active champion and activist on money and politics doesn't necessarily mean that they sort of embrace all tenets of what Move to Amend has embraced. And so I really think it's important for us to sort of do more work in terms of educating him and cultivating him as a champion. Caitlin, I'm sure you have much more to add on both those topics.
Yeah, I can add a couple more things. I mean, The reality is that we don't actually have any groups on the ground in Vermont. Vermont was one of the first states to pass a resolution at the state level, and we did a lot of work to get town hall or town meetings. Vermont is one of the states that actually gives the public the opportunity to set policy directly by citizens coming to an annual town meeting. And so we, several years ago, did a whole series with some other organizations and some folks on the ground in Vermont of campaigns to get town meetings to pass resolutions calling for an amendment that would address corporate constitutional rights and money of speech the way that the We the People amendment does. And as a result of that work, we also then got the state to pass a resolution through their state legislature. And it was one of the first states to do that. And that state language is really solid and strong. Then, though, all of those Vermont organizers kind of moved on to other things because they were like, okay, great, we got that done. But they didn't kind of do the last piece, which is the follow-up on their state, on their federal representatives and senators. So we're in the process of kind of trying to shore that up with Bernie Sanders in mind in particular, because I think, and a couple folks have noted here, like he seems like he would be supportive, right? Much of what he has said, corporations are not people and money is not speech. And he said, we need an amendment. We need to overturn Citizens United. So all four of those things sound like, hey, that fits exactly with Move to Amend. But the reality is that Bernie Sanders introduced a different amendment several years ago that was actually deeply problematic. It kind of was the only amendment that has codified that corporations did have constitutional rights, because what it said is that for-profit corporations didn't have constitutional rights and that non-profit corporations did. And that actually is really problematic. No corporation should have constitutional rights. Citizens United is a 501c4 nonprofit corporation. PACs are nonprofit corporations. So he just maybe didn't think that one through too deeply and got some blowback. And then as a result has kind of stepped away from this issue in terms of championing it, in terms of, you can see he signed on to the Udall Amendment, which is the sort of lesser amendment that doesn't really actually address corporate constitutional rights at all. And just says Congress has the authority to regulate campaign spending, which really doesn't go far enough. And so Sanders is a co-sponsor on that, but he really doesn't speak about it very often. He doesn't take the lead. So we're also in the process of kind of trying to rebuild that relationship and educate him further and make him feel more comfortable being a champion of something that doesn't have policy flaws and also isn't too weak to really accomplish our goals. And I think we could say our goals that would include his goals. You know, certainly Sanders has been a great leader in many issues that relate to corporate power. So we're working on that. And if folks know people in Vermont, that's sort of the best people to help with that. Because yes, he has a national platform as a presidential candidate, but at the end of the day, he is a senator because of the voters in Vermont, right? So that's who he listens to in terms of what he gets introduced in the Senate. So that's how we're working on that. And we also have some other targets to get it introduced in the Senate. And from our perspective, we want the exact same language that we've got in the House to be introduced in the Senate. So that's what we'll continue, and that's part of why we hired Celine to have a legislative staff person who can kind of focus more on this and help build that capacity. So there's a couple more questions. We can go until 6:30, but if we're done sooner, then everybody can go eat dinner. So we'll try to be efficient, but if others have questions, please do go ahead and put them in. We're happy to stay here and make sure everybody gets your questions answered. So Rick asks, can it be brought to the Supreme Court to redecide? Can it be overturned in the Supreme Court? Have there been, and then a different question, have there been efforts to reach out to student leaders in the March for Our Lives movement? So I can kind of take this pretty quickly just in terms of the past. So, I mean, technically, yes, the Supreme Court can reverse itself like they did in Brown versus Board of Education, right? Where they had originally said that segregation was constitutional and not a violation of the 14th Amendment, and Jim Crow was not a problem. And then the civil rights movement was built, basically from that decision was necessary, and ultimately was able to get the Supreme Court to reverse itself when they built the power to basically make it so that segregation was no longer tenable and viable politically to support. So that can be done, but there are not very many examples of the court reversing itself. The court is a very just institutionally conservative institution that doesn't like to revisit or change or modify or go back on cases that have already been decided. So that feels like a big long shot because of that. And then the other thing is that the court reversing itself or adjusting itself or changing itself, what are we talking about? Are we talking about Citizens United? Or are we talking about the doctrines that actually helped prop up and create the conditions for Citizens United to happen? That corporations have constitutional rights and the money is speech, which were both court-created doctrines as well, but go way before Citizens United. So corporate constitutional rights goes back to the late 1800s, and even some pushes before that. And money is speech goes to the 1970s, right? So is the court really going to reverse 130 years of case law that they established and have taken the lead on? We don't think so. And then further, even if the court were to reverse itself, then it's always open for reinterpretation again in the future. So the only real kind of lasting and clear solution is to put it in the Constitution, to basically put the court back in its place and say, you did not have the authority to give corporations constitutional rights in the first place. So we're going to take that away from you and put it in the hands of, you know, the whole country, which is where it deserves to be, and to make clear that only human beings have constitutional rights. At this point, corporations have so much power and are so entrenched in so many areas of our society that leaving it up to the courts really doesn't feel like a very safe way to address the issue. And the amount of effort that it would take to get that court to reverse itself, I think it would take less effort actually to amend the Constitution, believe it or not. So that is Move to Amend's strategy, and we definitely are not putting any resources into trying to get the court to reverse itself. There are some groups who are, but they are really only looking at the Citizens United reversal, which if we go back to the politics of 2009, corporations will still dominate every aspect of society, and money will still actually dominate the political process, because the system wasn't working before Citizens United. Citizens United just made it worse. So that's that. And then in terms of reaching out to leaders of the March for Our Lives, yes, we are actually working on that. And as part of our leadership summit, which is in Washington, D.C., and I hope everybody will consider coming and joining us in June in D.C. for our national conference that we are going to be holding. we are working on having some folks involved with that who are in the DC area who helped put on the March for Our Lives in DC. And hopefully we will have success there. Let's see. Thanks for, okay, good feedback on some of those answers. Oh, somebody had earlier asked, I'm sorry, I don't remember who it was, what the difference was between 501c3 organizations and C4. So just real quick to explain that. So Move to Amend is actually a 501c4, and then we have a 501c3 arm. And the difference has to do with the foundational difference is charitable contributions. So people who donate to a 501c3 can write that off their taxes. And then that means that everything that the 501c3 money is used for has to be educational and cannot be advocacy or lobbying. And so we do a ton of educational work, and that's why we have a 501c3 arm for all of our workshops that we do and trainings and kind of the history that we teach and all of that. But in terms of all of the lobbying and advocacy work that we do, that's why Move to Amend as a main organization is a 501c4, and those contributions are not tax deductible, and we have more latitude in terms of how we can spend that money. So that allows us, so it still has to be educational. Believe it or not, it gets kind of murky, but there's more room for advocacy. So we can't straight up just give money to candidates or coordinate with political committees or political parties. That's what a political action committee or a PAC can do, and Move to Amend is not a PAC. So that's why we have some limitations on what our activities can be, and they have to kind of, mostly all the stuff around election work has to be about helping voters to get the information that they need to decide how they want to vote. And so that's why Pledge to Amend is, really about sharing the views of candidates with the voters so that then they can make a choice. We can't say, vote for this person because they're good. But we can say, this is our position, and these are the people who support it, and these are the people who don't, in their own words. And we also can never engage right now, since we're not a PAC, in electioneering, trying to get one person elected to office over another, or trying to get one person out of office over another. So that's it's actually pretty complicated, but that's kind of my quick answer. I don't know if Salim, you want to add?
I just want to add in quickly. I have sort of two rules of thumb that I sort of use to guide myself, and I think it's really helpful for folks. I think the one that I'll sort of probably beat into your head tonight is to make sure you're engaging all candidates. Is sort of the one rule of thumb. And the second is, as long as you're talking about the issues or a particular piece of legislation and not the candidate's election or campaign or anything related to that, is sort of the way to stay clear of any legal gray areas.
Mm-hmm. And we can also help you with that. If you've got a particular question in a particular situation, we can kind of help you figure out how to make sure that Move to Amend doesn't get in trouble, and that we can still try to, do as much as we can to kind of further our agenda. So a couple more things that are mostly, well, there's one question here. Michael, who I think might have had to jump off, but just for the recording, asks, do you think that Pledge to Amend activity could help us get our local resolution passed? So he's in Prescott, Arizona, as one of our affiliate leader there, just Salim for your background. And they've been trying to get their city council to pass a resolution, but their city council has been pretty negative about it. So do you want to speak at all to how those two things might go together?
Sure. I mean, I don't want to be too simple about this, but politicians want to get reelected. So if you make this an election issue and really can show a significant demonstration of grassroots support that this is a primary concern to voters in your area, I think you are certainly going to find both incumbents as well as sort of new members to office much more receptive to taking action on this issue. So I think that this is a fantastic tool to sort of advance that cause. And as we all know, candidates and politicians, incumbents, are much more receptive to listening to a whole host of different issues when they are campaigning that sometimes they are a little less receptive to when they're actually governing. And so I really think it's important to engage them during this time. I also think sort of from the public perspective is a really good opportunity to take folks who are sort of motivated and civically engaged during election season and sort of form a governing coalition, right? Folks who can sort of hold politicians accountable to their positions once they are in office. And so both from the elected official standpoint and also sort of the grassroots perspective, it's a really good tool to sort of engage people and keep them motivated. I don't know if you have anything to add, Caitlin.
No, I think that's great. And I guess also just in general, I mean, remembering that we really need to make this a litmus test issue. And like the person, I think his name is John, who is a candidate, it's like this issue excites people and motivates people. And yet, are they willing to vote based on it? Are people willing to vote based on this, the way that they vote based on, where a candidate stands on abortion or gun control? That's up to us to actually make it to something that, is kind of like, if you're not in the right place, then you will lose my vote. And so the more we can do to kind of make races where that's true, the more candidates in all over the place will be paying attention, and then we will be able to hold them to it when they're in office, whether it's getting a local resolution passed or becoming a co-sponsor, because they're in Congress.
And I just want to emphasize one last thing really quickly. I think you made a great point earlier that this is a foundational issue that's connected to so many other different things. And so I think sort of from the voter grassroots perspective, is really important that folks who are really passionate about some of those other issues that you mentioned, connecting the dots for them as to why this is very relevant is a really good strategy to engage folks and really make this a litmus test issue.
Mm-hmm. And for those of you who are involved with affiliates and have like a little bit more capacity than folks like Rachel, who are kind of just getting started by herself, really thinking about the candidate forums and the candidate meet and greets, and potentially doing that in partnership with other organizations that maybe are working on more kind of the issues that are impacted by what we're working on. And then being able to make those connections, both to the candidates, but also to the public that comes and participates in those. And then you can build bridges in solidarity as well. So for those of you who are looking to, implement your solidarity outreach plans that came from your movement education process, maybe doing a joint candidate forum with folks who are concerned about gun control right now, or with Black Lives Matter, talking about, the militarization and privatization of the police. And, so I mean, like, we can be making these connections and then helping to build alliances and bridges that will continue on past the election, no matter who gets elected. And that's all important too. Okay, so it looks like there's just a couple tips here, and then I think we will be done. So Greg points out, and Greg is our outreach director, with the reduction of investigative journalists who research campaign finance reports, which normally used to always be published every time a campaign finance report would come out, and the filings would be submitted by the candidates of kind of who had spent or who had raised money and who were the top donors to races, et cetera. And a lot of that isn't really happening as much because newspapers either don't exist or don't have staff. He says anything that we can do to analyze and comment on candidate campaign contributions have a good chance of being covered. So it's a good chance for Move to Amend to receive publicity. So getting up on that, and then submitting a press release or a statement when those reports come out to the newspaper means that you're doing some of the work for them to give them talking points for that, or people to quote. So that's a really good point, Greg. And then Michael says, I find that printing a QR code that takes people with smartphones directly to the sign up page is helpful. So whether that's the motion to amend, or if you're out there trying to get people to take the voter pledge, just kind of having a page where people can just point their phone and then go right to the link, and they don't have to know the URL, and then they can fill it out there right on the spot. Or having a computer, if you're a farmer's market and you've got your city has wireless or something like that, or you can tether to your phone, just having the website open and having people take the voter pledge that way can be good too. So I think that is most of the gist of it. There's one more. Douglas says, if Trump succeeds in getting Congress to do away with the Johnson Amendment, even if we overturn the Citizens United decision, wouldn't allow religious institutions to become political action committees and funnel dark money to political campaigns. You want to speak to that, or do you want me to?
I will put that in your basket.
Okay, I don't want to get into too much of the details, but I mean, this is part of why I'm actually going to sort of go back to, so Move to Amend is about more than overturning the Citizens United decision. So if we actually make clear that corporations and actually really artificial entities, which religious institutions are as well, do not have constitutional rights, then that is the foundation that's needed to pass legislation to make sure that any political action committees, like say this all happens and Trump is able to do away with the Johnson Amendment, which if you don't know what that is, I wouldn't worry about it too much, but it's basically like part of the separation of church and state that we've got in place right now that maybe is under attack and threatened. And so there is a concern there, but really the solution is not to overturn Citizens United only, but to make clear that any entity created by government, which includes, recognized by government, which includes churches or organizations or political action committees or unions or nonprofits or for-profit corporations or any other thing that we might invent in the future, does not have constitutional rights and therefore can be regulated in whatever ways that are appropriate and we see fit. That is what's needed to protect against this or any other shenanigans that Trump is and this Congress are able to, or any future Congresses are able to put in place. So that's part of why we keep it as systemic as possible, because then this nitty gritty kind of doesn't even really matter. If we solve that problem, then we can move forward. Otherwise, we're just kind of tinkering at the margins, and that's a constant fight to our tinkering be, pushed back by other legislation or Supreme Court decisions, and that's why we kind of need this lasting solution once and for all. So maybe that is a good note to end on. I don't see any other questions. So want to thank you all for being here, and I think there's one more slide, right, Salim, in terms of next steps. So there is a survey that your browser will be taken to right at the end of this webinar, and if you would give us your feedback on how you felt about how this went and any suggestions you have for us. There's also a way for you to let us know what kind of follow-up you need and any questions that you still have. And you can contact us at the info@move2amend, or if you have particular pledge to amend questions, Salim@move2amend.org is probably just going straight to him. And our next webinar will be, they're normally on the first Tuesday, so we're going to go back to that. So it'll be on May 1st, which is International Workers' Day, and May Day, which is a very appropriate day to have a webinar on direct action. So we will be doing that as kind of our series on direct action that we'll have throughout the year. So this will be webinar number 2 on direct action and civil disobedience. And you can feel free to suggest other topics in the survey. So do you have anything else to add, Salim, to close us out?
Yeah, quickly, I just want to thank Caitlin for being an excellent co-host. I want to make a quick plug for the Leadership Summit. I really think it's a great opportunity to come meet us in person to really get some in-depth answers to your questions that maybe we weren't able to address here, and maybe even to do some strategizing over a good meal. So it's a really great opportunity. And we're going to need a lot of support to reach that 300 number. So if any way I can be of assistance, please do not hesitate to reach out to me just with a simple question, or if you need help sort of strategizing for a plan, I'm happy to sort of schedule a call with your group to discuss things further. We're going to get there, but we're only going to do it in solidarity. So thank you. This is the first step. So I really thank you guys for joining tonight. And I hope you have a great evening.
Awesome. Thank you, Salim. You did great. This was his first webinar with us, and it was easy peasy for me because you did so awesome. So thank you. I included a link to the Leadership Summit in the comment or in the chat bar. And yes, do want to echo that we'd love to see you there. And I think we're going to do a session on bird dogging training. We'll do a lobbying training. We're going to have a National Lobby Day. So Salim will have many more opportunities to wow you with his wisdom if you join us at the Leadership Summit. So thanks everyone for being here tonight. We will be sending you both the recording and the slides, and then all the pages that we mentioned as well. We can kind of include in that follow-up email that we'll be sending out to you tomorrow. So don't hesitate to be in touch if there's anything we missed or anything that comes up for you later, and have a great night. Take care.